What's good, boys? I'm going to be starting a new series called Movie Wars, where it's basically movie versus movie, or a category, a group of movies versus another. But in today's Movie Wars, we're going to be doing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood versus Babylon. Because I noticed they're both similar, they're both about Hollywood, and to be honest, both of them could be named Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But there can be only one winner for this Movie Wars matchup, so let's get into it right now. First of all, you have to understand how similar these movies are. On one hand, we got Babylon, talking about three main characters: Diego, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, centered around them, their three lives, their rise and downfalls in Hollywood in the 20s and 30s, centered around Hollywood, basically, the whole movie. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, about three main characters, again, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Leonardo DiCaprio, centered around Hollywood, but not in the 20s and 30s, in the 60s. And it's just about their lives and their experiences throughout their day. So you can see how similar these movies are off the bat. Up first, we got the storyline and plot. Honestly, both of them are good. I love their storylines. Both of them come from good writers. I don't know who wrote Babylon. It might have been the director, it might have not, but whoever wrote Babylon is a great-ass writer, because you just outbeat Tarantino in a writing contest. The Babylon storyline is so good because it shows the story of coming up in Hollywood at that time and the raw truth of Hollywood at that time. You know, the party in the beginning, the tunnels underground Hollywood, you know, the life of Brad Pitt, where he has to, off himself because he fell off. The raw truth of becoming a director in Hollywood at that time. It tells so much stories, and there's so many things going on. There's so many details. There's so much stuff to work with. I thought it was an impeccable story. And that's no shade to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because Tarantino is my favorite director of all time. If you know me, I love Tarantino. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is such a good movie. But the storyline, it gets outbeat. And it's not because it's bad. It's because there's so much stuff. There's so much more stuff in Babylon than in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is just a day time frame. I mean, Babylon, there's so much stuff. So that's why I have to give the storyline to Babylon. And I just think it's a more interesting storyline. Coming up in the 20s and 30s of the rise in Hollywood, yeah. Come on, the storyline goes to Babylon. Next up, we got the cinematography. Tarantino versus Damien Chazelle. Damien Chazelle is a good director. He did Whiplash, he did La La Land. He's made a lot of good projects. It's hard to beat Tarantino, though. And with following that, the cinematography of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was better than Babylon's. Well, Babylon's was good cinematography, but it wasn't special, though. You know what I mean by special. You just feel something when you're watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You can tell. Isn't bad cinematography for Babylon. It just, Tarantino, he's a veteran in this. He's so far into his career. He knows all the ins and outs. I felt it. The cinematography was a lot better in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood than Babylon. So for acting and characters, this is where things get fucking interesting. Babylon has such a stacked cast. Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Flea, Tommy McGuire, and I probably forgot some more. There's so many characters in Babylon. But on the other hand, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's cast, it's not about the cast, but I gotta give props to both of the movies' casts. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood movie cast. Okay, Al Pacino, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Margot Robbie, Sydney Sweeney. There's so many. There's youngsters in it. The guy who played Pennywise. There's so many options, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's cast is such good. The guy who played Wyatt Earp in Tombstone. What's his fucking name? I know. I'll put them on the screen. Yeah, there's so many characters, and they just pop out of nowhere. Even these A-list, top-tier actors just get some side role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and that's okay. And it makes the movie so much better, because it's just like, bro, we're used to seeing you in the spotlight, and then you're just playing some side character, and then you execute it perfectly, and it fits with the storyline perfectly. So, yeah, I gotta give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a better cast. But both of the casts are good. Like I said, Babylon, obviously, you look at the 3 stars there. The acting, though. The acting and the characters. Because it's not just about the cast. It's not just about the acting. You got to also get into the characters. The acting was good from both. Obviously, you already got top-tier actors in both. But it really comes down to the characters. I was emotionally tied to the characters of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I liked the characters in Babylon, but I didn't feel really as tied to them as I did with the characters in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The Once Upon a Time in Hollywood characters, I cared about them. I liked Cliff Booth. I got matching Cliff Booth clothes when I watched the movie for the first time in 2020. I love Rick Dalton. I didn't really love Margot Robbie. I do love Margot Robbie. I do love her. If you know, you know. But, I felt more tied and more connected to the characters, and I love the characters from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood better. That's why I'm giving this section to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I would love to hang out with Rick Dalton. I would love to hang out with Cliff Booth and just know them. And if they were real life characters, yeah, I'd fucking love them even more because they're awesome. All right, we went through the three categories. At this time, we have to choose a winner. I love Babylon. I watched it twice in the span of a month because of how much I loved it. And just in case I missed anything, I had to give it a second watch because I enjoyed it the first time. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I also watched it like 3 times in a month after it came out in 2019, 2020. Around that era is when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for the first time. Both of the movies are great, but there can only be one winner, and it has to be the man himself, Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino did such a good job with this movie. It's honestly one of the greatest movies, in my opinion, of all time. I feel like it's definitely in the top 100 for IMDb. It might not be for IMDb, but I think it should be. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of Tarantino's greatest works, and it's a great cast, and it's one of the greatest movies of all time. It's hard to beat that, but I had to do the movie wars because these movies are so similar. But at the end of the day, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a better movie. It just is. Maybe Babylon has a better storyline, but the better movie and the more enjoyable movie to watch on a Friday night is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The vibes are better, and I think most of you guys would go there as well. I don't think any of you guys are going to choose Babylon over Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I feel like Babylon's got a more niche down community. It's not out there for the masses. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. You like Babylon or you don't. But with all said and done, I hope you enjoyed the video. I love all of you guys, and please subscribe.